Sebastian.
Hey, thank you all so much. My voice booms, so please let me know if I'm being too loud. And yeah, Neil, you were so good on the podcast. Anyone who's interested in what Neil's done in his career you ought to check it out. It's a lot of good stuff. So. It was the quality of the color that struck Marcy so deeply. As she watched from her room, from the room with the bay window, the one where she spent her days, the window looked out on the half-acre backyard, which was alive with plant life most of the year and wildlife year-round. This morning there was a lot of activity. This morning the sun was shining, though the air was a bit cold. It could get cold in Kentucky. Not many people up north, way away, knew how cold it could get below what in the summers called the Mason-Dixon line. In Kentucky, Marcy wasn't really far below that magic line someone had drawn, but she was far enough. Anyway, there was a lot of activity in the backyard this morning. She sure hoped the blue jays would come today, and sure enough, there they were. She loved how blue they looked as they dug in the ground into the big swinging feeder her dad had put out. He put it out because he knew it would bring the birds, especially the jays. He knew she loved the jays and her dad loved her, and that was the reason he put the big swinging feeder out. Toast? Marcy turned her head to the left to look over her shoulder. Paula. Miss Paula set a small plate with a few pieces of toast on Marcy's lap. One was a bit more burnt than the other. Paula knew she liked the toast that way, and right next to the pieces were two plastic peel-back containers with strawberry jam, Marcy's favorite. She looked blankly at Paula, who then walked away. Marcy took the plastic knife out of the plastic bag, which had the plastic knife and fork. She set the fork aside and used the knife to spread the jam thickly over the crispy toast. She crunched out a bit and with a mouthful of both garbled, "Thank you, Miss Paula." She turned to look out the back window. The jays had gone and a few squirrels had replaced them. Marcy didn't care for squirrels. She liked the jays because they were pretty, and the blue struck her eye and made her want to keep watching them. Her dad told her last year that the blue jays were mean. She didn't believe him until she started watching them more closely. Then she knew what he meant. They chased off the other birds, the robin redbreasts, the cardinals. Was it the male or the female cardinal that was brighter red than the other? She couldn't remember. That's what was so strange. She had trouble remembering what her dad told her sometimes. The doctor said that she might remember some things and not others, and the very next day remember the things she forgot the day before. He said it was okay if she forgot things. "You want juice?" Paula's moon face hung above her like a big balloon with a green tint. Marcy nodded, with toast crumbs falling into her lap. Paula produced a sparkling clean glass and filled it half full, or was it half empty? Marcy couldn't remember, and put it on the little tray set up in front of the bay window. She set down the toast, grabbed the small glass with both hands and pulled it up to take a sip. She let the pulp float around in her mouth as the rest drained down. Marcy set the glass back on the table, and the thought occurred to her that she was very aware of some things but not of others. The OJ was an explosion in her mouth, and yet she couldn't feel her legs, and the feeling in her arms was fading. The doc said this would happen more and more. She remembered for a moment why she kept forgetting. It was crystal clear to her. She was making herself forget. Why was she making herself forget? Because what she kept thinking about, remembering, hurt so bad. "You good on the toast, baby?" Paula's puffy hand with the brown spots reached down for the plate. Marcy didn't even realize she had eaten both slices. "Blue," Marcy squeaked and pointed to the backyard. Paula looked out at all the activity. "The blue jays again." Paula set one hand on her huge hip and looked back into Marcy's half-lit eyes. "It's a bit cold out, hun. Maybe too cold, I don't know. Let me see if I can find your brother and he can take you out." Marcy panned her head to look back out the window, and Paula waddled off with the plate. The jays were back, and they were chasing the squirrels away this time. Her dad was right about those birds. They were mean, but they got what they needed and what they wanted. They didn't have to have someone bring them things. They took what they wanted. Maybe that was what made them so interesting. They had those beautiful blues. They looked like they'd be nice if they walked up to you and talked, but they weren't nice. She knew her dad was right because she'd been watching them. The day one flapped its wings, knocking into a robin, sending it rolling away, that was very mean. The mourning doves never bothered anybody, yet she saw one of the smallest jays she'd ever seen strut right up to two of those doves and start squawking and flapping, and away they went. But then, the worst thing. She watched a really mean jay knock 2 eggs out of the nest set in the big water maple tree. It knocked those eggs right down to the ground, and the mama bird had flown off, probably to find something. And the jay swooped down to the ground, and she couldn't watch what it was doing to the eggs. It was too horrible, but she remembered. A fat squirrel jumped on the feeder at that moment. Miscalculating, its body slapped into the plastic bottom, dumping food onto the ground below. It ran off like it was embarrassed about the failed leap, and within 20 seconds, birds and a few chipmunks appeared to peck and chew at the fallen seed. Says, Jerry, her brother. She had smelled him long before he came up behind her. That was another weird thing. She could smell things she couldn't smell before. Things other people couldn't smell at all or couldn't smell nearly as much as she could. He smelled like Irish spring soap and bacon. Big P said he wanted to go out. He had to put his right hand on her shoulder, and she felt it all through her body. He was looking at her intently, like she was a mentally handicapped person or something, like someone who may or may not understand words and needed careful explanation. Marcy was about to nod to him, but realized her head wasn't moving. 3 things, Pipsqueak. Paula's voice was booming from behind her, but Marcy couldn't see her couldn't crane her neck to see. Number 1, I've worked here, folks, for 20 years and will still turn you over my knee like I used to. Jared stood up and rolled his eyes. Number 2, what did you do to those clothes you put in the wash? Were you rolling around in manure? I don't get paid enough. Jared looked down at Marcy with the gaze they always shared when Paula went off on one of her I don't get no respect monologues. Marcy knew the language and gestures, but somewhere knew she couldn't produce the responses Jared had come to expect the way she used to. She was sad about that. And number 3, you're almost 16 and you keep talking about how you want a girl. I'll give you some advice. Calling any woman Big P or Big any letter or Big anything or just Big. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's going to keep you single for a long time. Got it? Marcy heard Paula's elephantine thuds move back into the kitchen. Jared stayed fixed on him. All right, you can go out, but we're going to have to keep you warm. Jared had helped her into her fat and pink parka and slid her SpongeBob earmuffs over her straight blonde hair and ears. The cold was almost too much for her throat and lungs, but she didn't want to complain because Jared would take her back inside. In the warm, direct sunlight, the patterns of her blue pajama bottoms danced in her eyes. Jared rolled her down the ramp her dad had installed after the wreck. At the bottom, things got bumpier as Jared pushed and wedged the wheels through the hard ground. The wildlife scattered as they approached the feeder and the small koi pond. The circle in the ground had been empty of water and fish since summer. It had been her mother who cared for the creatures. Marcy just remembered she hadn't seen her mother in a long time. Okay, Jared said, his voice overtly positive. You like it here? Marcy felt like she wanted to turn her head and respond, but could not. Jared knelt down in Marcy's field of view. You'll be okay here, sis. I'll be back in a little while, and then Dad will be home and we'll have dinner, okay? Even less of a response than yesterday. Jared started to push through his haunches to stand up straight. His hand was touching Marcy's on the chair arm. She squeezed his hand into hers, gently, warmly. A small smile drifting across her ivory face, her pouty O-shaped lips. Jared's other hand came to cover hers. The smiling veneer and upbeat energy had dropped away to one of vulnerability, of lost family and love, of lost opportunity, of the tragic sweetness and the savoring of moments short and long. His crouch became a kneel, and he let his head drop into her lap. Marcy felt deep trembles move from her brother into her body. She welcomed them. She knew what they were. Love, shared life, surrender to the reality of whatever. It was nearly 5:30 when Dave got home. Traffic was brutal going to and coming from. He came through the garage door silently, still unable to say, "I'm home," since Sheila died. Paula was nowhere to be seen, but ground beef was brown and sizzling. Taco shells, lettuce, Mexican. Okay. The place felt even emptier than it had been since summer. He poured a glass of milk and pushed through the swinging door to the den. No one. Then, out the bay window, God. The doctor said, such a peaceful sight. His son gently hugging the lap of his sister, her one arm dangling, the other held firmly by her loving brother, her head fallen forward in a sweet repose. Dave had an impulse to run out, but could not move. His mind said one thing, his body another. Paula stood some feet away from the tranquil scene, dish rag in hand, dabbing swollen eyes. His own eyes watered. The milk quivered. His mind flashed to the ecstatic moment he first saw Michelangelo's Pietà at St. Peter's. The trip to Rome and Vatican City, summer of, what year was that? He couldn't remember. To hell with it. He felt his lower spine drop through the earth. Birds of all types flocked and fed around the sweet tableau, surrounding his children. Some stayed a little while, some longer. He wiped his eyes, gulped down the milk, and sat on the bay window ledge, his back to the scene. Dave slowly fell sideways into a fetal position, drawing his legs up beyond the sill. He nibbled on his thumb. He needed to be like this for a time. Though his bright birds had flown away, he smelled meat burning.